Is everyone here already? Good afternoon again. My name is Tracy Lemke. You may call me Tracy. Okay. I'm supposed to deliver this in the morning because I'm supposed to talk about the basics. I don't know how you're going to feel right now because we just came from discussing about security and now we went back to the basics.
That's okay.
Okay, great. So just a random check because I'm not sure about the level of knowledge that you have right now. So I don't want to. I would like to know who among you here are beginners. Okay, intermediate, experts. Experts? Michael, are you sure? Okay. So since I'm going to be talking about the basics only. So I'll just stay basic as much as possible, but if you have questions, please feel free to ask. Okay, now I have some, along the slides I'll be showing you some demonstrations and samples, and you can download it in this GitHub. You can do it now. You can unpack it on your on your local host, and yeah, you can run it along with me. What happened? Okay. All right. So this whole afternoon, I'm just only going to talk about the basics, something about date and time, the different design patterns, and talking about how to deal with UTF-8 characters. Okay. So we all know how quick we can create codes with PHP, right? Like you don't need to compile it. You just write your script and then call it from the browser or from your console. You just write PHP and then call the script name, and then you get an output, right? Very easy. So in relation to that, let me discuss about the different kinds of comparison operators, which is commonly where developers find fault because they don't realize, because PHP has a different way of handling variables. You don't need to explicitly define them. PHP will just intelligently detect what they are. Okay? So along with that, I'll be talking about conditional statements, global namespace strings, and variable declarations. So there's a lot to talk about this, but let me start by showing you the table of the different logical operators that you can use for PHP. So I think we all know already how to declare variables. So when we have here the double equal, which is comparing the value of two variables. You can use triple equal, which is to compare strictly the value of two variables. Okay, so do you want me to finish with this one, or you're okay with this? I'm just asking you because we're running out of time. I think we only have a few minutes left. So you want me to continue? No need. Okay, great. So I think this is pretty straightforward. So like I said earlier, PHP has this thing called type juggling. It tries to understand what is the type of data you have in your variable. So for example, if you say foo equal to 0, but you enclose it in double quotes, it will treat it as a string. Okay? And then, if you add something to it, if you perform a mathematical operation to it, since 0 is a number and 2 is a number, it will try to interpret it as an integer. Okay? Then, for example, you you add a float number to it, automatically it treats it as a float. Okay? The other thing, last two examples, is that if you have an integer and you try to add it with a string, as long as the first set of character in your string is a number, then it will treat it as a number. Okay? So, okay, let's go to the demonstration very quickly. Okay. Okay. So if you have this line of code, you will see here that I was trying to assign 5 to A. So if you're going to check what is the value of that one, it will return to you, if you want to evaluate whether that the value of that variable is 5 or not, you can say var_dump A == 5 unenclosed, and it will return to you true because the value of your A is 5. But if you also enclose your 5 with quotations, it still returns true because it can convert the value of your A into a string, and thus when you compare it with this, it would naturally return true. But another way of comparing values is by strict comparison, which is using triple equal. Okay? So in that case, since the value of your A is an integer, it would when you compare it with using strict comparisons, you have to make sure that the other one you want to compare it with is an integer of the same type. So in this case, it would return false. In this case, it would return true, but if you compare it with this one, it will return false. Okay? So I'm just trying to highlight here that you have to be very careful with your comparison, because you might get an unexpected result when you compare it when you do an evaluation with your data wrongly. Okay. Okay. Another way another example we have here is we tried to look for test from a string testing. Okay. This one would return false because trpos is a function that tells you whether you found a string inside another set of string. In this case, we want to look for the word test inside testing. When trpos function will return 0, the 0 in this case. And since you say if, then naturally 0 would be translated as false, right? So you have to be very careful about using trpos. In this case, you may want to add a strict comparison to perform your evaluation. Okay. So, like I said, you can download the simple scripts from Git, and you can run it on your local. Let me see, I have another example here. Oh, I think it's the same. Okay, yeah, this example is what I showed you earlier, which is this one. So if you look at this code, see, 5 is a number, and this one is a string. But it treated it as a number because the first character is a number. Okay, so if I change it to X And if I run my application, my script, this one, sorry, it changed to a different size. Okay. Okay. I don't know what happened. The size changed, but it still treats it as a. Hey, wait.
Did you refresh?
Oh, I did.
You saved the file?
I saved the file.
That helps.
Actually, it will treat it as an integer if the first character is e, because it will treat it as an exponent or a number. But if you change it to something else, it should treat it as a string. Okay, maybe I miss out something. Okay, my mistake.
Can you make your browser window a little bigger?
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Okay, we'll do that exercise. Let's help me find out what's wrong there. Maybe I said something wrong. Okay. Okay. So those are the ways you can perform comparisons with PHP. All right. So let's proceed with the conditional statements. There are two ways you can perform conditional statements with PHP, which is by using an if else, or a switch case. So I believe you are familiar with if else. Has any one of you done any programming aside from PHP? Great. Okay. So if else, it's a conditional statement where you compare strings just like what we showed you just now. So it evaluates whether a condition is true or false. Okay. So you can have a simple if condition is equal to this, then you perform this, or you can have a nested if. Okay. So this example is a function wherein you pass a parameter inside a function for you to evaluate, and inside that it will return true if it's true, and otherwise it will return false. But you see, if you look at that very simple script, you may not need to put an else there, because if you say if a is equal to true, it will immediately get out of the function and then just exit, right? So if you want to optimize it, you may not put else and then just put the false at the bottom. To make it a lot better, you can just say return, then say bool, means you're trying to evaluate the value of a. This one will return 1 or 0 explicitly. Okay? Okay. So the next example is, we'll go to the if enough demo later. So the next example is a switch case. So switch works similarly with if and else, except that you don't need to put multiple else if. So all you need to do is just put your comparison at the top, and then your different expected values at the bottom as a case. So switch statements are great to avoid typing endless ifs, just like I said. Switch case only we have to take note of these that I bulleted. Switch case only compare values by loose comparison, so not strict. See, this is what you need to remember. There are two types of comparing, right? There's one is loose, where you only need to compare two values, and the other one is strict, where you have to make sure that the type is also the same. So in the case of switch case, they only perform loose comparison. So for switch case, they iterate case by case until the match is found. And if there's none, it will go to the default if you specify the default. So you have to be careful also that without a break, they will continue to read the line until it finds the break part, or until it finds a return in the line, okay? It will never stop going through the cases until it finds a match or it sees the break. So yeah, we can use return in place of break, because that means it will, if it's inside the function, that means it will go out of the function. So we can also implement continue. Continue is something that you can use also instead of break, meaning you skip the next one and then you just continue performing. So let's look at some samples. Okay, so let's see this. Oops. So this is one example of a switch case. We have here a function that just evaluates the value of the parameter that you passed, and then you evaluate it, and then you perform the compare the values. So if you look at this code, on line 3, I was calling this function, I was passing 2, value of 2. So the cases was compare is 2, 1, no. It's 2, 2, yes. So what's inside this one is nothing, right? But it will continue to read case 3 because I didn't have a break in here. So that's what I'm saying earlier, that you have to be very careful in putting breaks wherever it is necessary in your switch case to avoid the application to continue reading the next line when it's not necessary. So in this case, when I place 2, it returns, it evaluated 3 because I didn't have a break. That's why it returned kopitiam. Okay, so if it had break here, then it could have exited, and I could return something else, like, what do I put? So if I run this, since I put 2, then it stopped at case 2 and it returned me the Swenson. Okay? So if I enter something else here, like a string XXX is not found in any of my cases here, right? So where would it go? It would go to the default. Okay, switch case, you may not have default. Okay, this is optional. It's up to you. So if there's no match, then it will just go out of the switch case. Okay. So now that I don't have default, when I call this, what do you think would be returned on the page? Nothing. Nothing like null. Why? Because the function just went straight to the last line of the function and did nothing. Let's try that. It did. Yes. Great. Thank you very much. Let's go on. Okay, so another example of comparison with conditional statement switch case is this. You could also switch. Okay, earlier we put the variable in the switch side, and then we evaluate the content of that value through the cases. In this case, we wanted to look for the truth. We want to evaluate true, okay, the true condition. So you just put true in the switch part, and then we perform some operations within the cases. So just like this, we put true, and then on the first case we say if the length of the SMS is like this, then you throw your message is too long, or if it has a character other than alphanumeric, then it was throw an error message, and so on and so forth. Okay, so if you run it, since my example here is too long, then that's why you saw message is too long. So if we try this other example, then you see something like sending you a message now. Sending a message now because my string is alphanumeric. But if I put a period here, since my preg match is not accepting any other characters, then it would say something like only another message. It will give you another message. Okay, pretty simple, right? Next. Okay, date and time. Personally, I don't like to play with date and time, but I'm happy now. But because PHP has this class date and time, last time it's quite tedious to work with date and time, especially when it involves time zones. So PHP now has a date and time class, and it helps you quickly in reading, writing, and comparing and calculating dates. So this one is obviously object-oriented, and it has it's yeah. Okay, it's okay now. So it's object-oriented, and it basically has almost all the functions you need for manipulating date time. So including manipulation of time zones. So it has a lot of classes under it. One of it is a date interval, which is commonly used when you perform mathematical perform add or adding and subtracting dates. And we also have another class which is very useful, which is a date period class that is used to iterate several sets of date times recurring and at regular intervals over a given period of time. So we will try to demonstrate what these are by looking at this one. So to start using date time, you need to create a date object. And the way to create a date object is it's two ways. You can create a date object from a date string. One that is pre-formatted, and the other one is a valid date string. So the first one is, example, you have a date in this format, 22.11. year. So you can create from format, and you specify the format of that raw data so that when the object converts the string, it knows that this is the month, this is the day part, and this is the year part. Okay? If you have a valid date string, then you can just call new date time and then just pass in the valid date string. Now when you already have the date time object, you can already start performing your date time functions, such as adding days to a date, and also so on and so forth. So in this case, I tried to clone the start date, and I tried adding months and days to it. So the way also to call to get the difference between two dates is just by saying your object and then call the diff function, and then you pass in the other date that you want to compare it with and get the difference. So with date time objects, you can easily compare dates also by just saying if start date is lower or greater than this date, then so on, then give me this. It's pretty easy, no more other conversion. So, okay, let's take a look how it works. Okay, so this is what we had. Like example, you have a raw, like what you saw earlier. I have my start date in row format. I just call this, and I have the date object. Then, if you want to play around with it, I already prepared some samples. You just uncomment it, and then comment the others. Okay. So another way to create a date object is by passing a valid date string, or you can just call it directly like this. It will give you the current date, a date object with the current date. Okay. Next, so if you wanted to to display the date, you can do so by calling the word format. And then inside the format, you can pass in your format. Okay? So for you to know what the valid formats are, you can just go to php.net for reference. I think the website has a link. The PHP the Right Way website has the links to the relevant functions that we have. So, okay. So this one is displaying this. Okay. And this one is right here. I'm cloning the start date. And here I'm adding a date from now. I'm adding 1 month and 6 days date. Okay, let me make it simple by just adding 6 days or 6 days or 10 days maybe. So it's easy for us to know. Then today is 8/6, right? So let's try to use this instead. You know, in PHP, whatever happens on the next part will always override the other, right? So even if I do this and I run this, it will always perform the last one. So it will not throw you any error, but it will just respect whatever is the most recent initiation. So now what I want to do is I want to add 6 days to this day. So I do that from here. This is our date. Then I it's added 10 days. So the expected result will be today plus next day would be 16 days. I do that. Then you have the today's date and the next date, which is 16 days later. Next would be a standard operation, which is what I showed you just now. It's very easy. All you need to do is just compare immediately the two date objects. So since your start date is not really greater than your end date, then of course it will show you this, right? So this statement will just evaluate the two dates, and it doesn't. If this one fails, then it will go here and get the difference between two dates. So you saw that there's 10 days difference between the two. And if I switch the logical operator to this, naturally it will be true, so it will display this. Okay? Okay. Next, we skip to the design patterns. So, framework is basic structure underlying a system that allows us to manage goals easier and for others to understand easier. And a lot of applications now are using these different design patterns, okay? From the very long... Okay. The common patterns to follow, these are the common patterns to follow to make your code easier and easier for others also to understand. So the different design patterns are the factory, singleton, strategy, front controller, and MVC. Singleton factory is the most commonly designed patterns. The benefits for this one is it's less effort in modifying the code, because when you modify later, you only need to modify in one place. You don't need to go modify in the different instances that you created it. And if creating the object is a complicated job, you can do all of the work in the same factory. So to show you an example for that, how it's created, let me show this. So this is an example of a factory. So you have the main class, you have the properties of all that class, and all you need to do is just create a factory and then create an instance of that main class inside your factory. So in the future, when you need to change the name of this factory, you only need to change on this part and then change here. Or if you want to modify the functions for that, you don't need to change the factories, but you only need to do it in one place. Okay? So how to instantiate or create that object? All you need to do is just declare your variable and then create. So if you print it, you will see this, Bugatti. Sorry, this one. The other way to do that is, sorry, I also only have one example for the factory. The next one would be okay. A singleton. Singleton is the same. You create one class and you create a child for it. But the only thing with singleton is that it's more strict. It only allows you to create an instance of that class in the entire application. So there may be cases wherein you only need to have one instance of that object in your web application. So this is how you should implement it. Okay, but of course you need to be very careful, because if you attempt again in one of your codes, you attempt to recreate that, of course it will throw an error. So an example of a singleton would look like this. So you have to take note. It's quite long, but there's a purpose for all these functions here. Okay, so the constructor, if you look at it, is declared as protected to prevent creating a new instance. Okay, to prevent the user from creating a new instance under it. Next, the magic method, which is clone, is declared as private to prevent cloning of an instance of the class via the clone operator. Okay, so the other one, wake up, is declared as private to prevent unserializing of an instance of the class via the global function unserialize. And then you will notice that a new instance is created via late static binding in a static creation method get instance here with the keyword static. This allows the subclassing of the class singleton in this example. So if you are going to create an object of that instance, of course this one would return true. But if you're going to create another one out of it, it will throw an error, something like cannot access property singleton. Okay? So if you're going to check, this one will return true because you declared it as a singleton child. Okay? Next would be, let me show you the output. Let me show you the output for that. So I just put 1, 2, 3 just for us to know which part of the code failed. So the first part returned true, which is just the instantiation of the object. And the second one failed because we tried to create another object of it. So at the back end, it actually returned something like the one I showed you just now, which is a PHP fatal error. That would say, cannot access the property, yada, yada, yada. The next is called a strategy. So the purpose mainly is to define a family of algorithms and encapsulate each one and make them interchangeable. Then this strategy lets the algorithm vary independently from the clients that use it. Okay, the other purpose is to capture the abstraction of an interface and bury the implementation details in derived classes. So let me show you how it's being used. So this is implementing an interface. We create an interface, output interface, and then you implement the interface in your classes. Okay? So when you implement the interface in your in the classes that you created, you can already use the function that you have to use the function that it has, and then you may have different method and different ways of manipulating your data inside the function that inside the function of load for this example. Okay. So another example is to create another class called client. We still implement the same output interface, and then this client would have an extra function called set output. So this one would be defined by the interface that we created, which is the output interface. And when we call it at our program, we can say we can instantiate the class like this. Client is equal to new some client, and then we can reuse the functions that it has depending on what output we want to use. I think there's something wrong with my example. JSON string. Oh yeah. Okay, here. It's too long. I want to show you. Okay. So you can specify, you can immediately create the object within the parameter that you want to pass it to by calling this one. So you say set output, and then you just instantiate within the parameter side by calling new JSON string, or if you want to call in the output array function, then you can just do the same thing. Okay. The next one, which is called the front controller, is a pattern where you have a single entrance point for your application. So mostly this is the entry point that handles all of the requests. So everything that goes into your application will go through that. So we call most of the time we call it as entry points. So the code is responsible for loading all of the dependencies, processing the request, and sending the response to the browser. The front controller pattern can be beneficial because it encourages modular code, gives you a central place to hook in your code that should be run for every request, such as input sanitation. So most of the time, the application frameworks that are available nowadays, like Yahoo, Cake, Laravel, Symfony, CI, and are using this kind of pattern. Okay, so like you only need to access the index of PHP, and the rest will have an autoloader to load all the required libraries for it, and so on and so forth. You don't need to go to the very specific PHP file to execute the application. Of course, it depends lah. Okay. So most of the time they implement some routers. Last one is the MVC. MVC lets you break up the code into logical objects that serve very specific purposes. So I think are you familiar with MVC? So M for model, V for views, which is what you see in the screen, C for controllers. So like what I mentioned earlier, for the front controllers pattern, most of the frameworks now uses MVC. Okay. So maybe I show you because I only have Code Igniter here. Maybe I can show you how Code Igniter looks like. Okay. Are you familiar with Code Igniter? Just now I met someone, and over there. So she needs to. I was telling her earlier that if you want to do a revamp a website, you need to start working with having your environment first. So you need to put up your web service, and then after that, once you have your database and your web service, then you can choose what framework you can use to maybe transform your website. So I would like you to explore these different frameworks, but for simplicity, I personally use Code Igniter. Although they said that they're going to throw it out, but I think they're releasing a new version. So I'm still using it for demonstration and for very, very lightweight, simple applications. So if you look at the folder, I don't think I can increase the font of this. So it has folder called application assets. So this framework has already organized its files accordingly, and you will see that it has here. It organizes its files, clump all together the JS in one folder, the style sheets in one folder, and everything about those libraries that you require to run the application is under the applications folder. So you will notice here a folder for the model. The model is what you mean. So model is for accessing the data, consuming your web services. It depends on you, but most of the time that's what we use. That's where we put these things in the model part. So the views are all your templates, your HTML and all that. Then you have your controllers in the controller folder. So this Code Igniter has a place also for it to load all the required libraries for the application to run. So that's what I was referring to when I was talking about the front controller. Okay. So now we're almost at the last part. Working with UTF-8. Sadly, PHP do not really have too much support on Unicode, especially on the lower level part. But there are a few things that that PHP has for us to work on these Unicode characters. Okay. So these advices are based on Alan Cabal. So I would just like to mention his name because it's not mine. Okay. So there are a few places that we can look at to ensure that we are handling the strings properly. So one could be at the PHP level side on our script and a PHP code. The other could be at the database side. And the last one would be at the HTML side. So on the PHP side, there are a few functions that we can use to handle Unicode characters. Okay, so the basic string operations normally do not require special handling. But for string, strpos, strlen, there is an equivalent function for that for processing Unicode characters. So for example, instead of using strpos, you may use mb strpos. Or instead of using strlen, you may use mb_strlen. So you will notice that it is prefixed with mb_star. But take note that not all of the functions has an equivalent mb_star. And so in that case, I'm sorry. You may need to find a way how to handle that. Okay. So in your script, you may need to, sorry. Why the power charger is not working? Okay, anyway, in your script, you just need to make sure that at the top and the bottom part, you specify, you call the function MB internal encoding, and at the bottom, call the MB HTTP output respectively, so that whatever multi-byte string functions you are using will work. Okay. For any other functions also, if given a chance for you to specify the type of encoding that you want to work on, you have to explicitly define it. For the case of HTML entities and HTML special cars, the default encoding is UTF-8 already. So there is an option though for you to use, which is this one, Patchwork UTF-8, if you're working on a distributed application. So, like if you deploy in an environment where you don't know, where you don't have control about the PHP settings, and you don't know whether the MB string extension is enabled, you may use this, because if your function is using MB string, MB underscore star or what, and it's not enabled at the back end, then it will fall back to the normal string processing functions. Okay, so this one has a reference in the website, so you can just research on it later. So at the database level, you just need to ensure that your database tables and the database itself is using UTF-8. UTF-8 MB for a character set and its collision. Then the other one is you have to make sure, note that you must use, UTF-8 MB4 character set for complete UTF-8 support, not UTF-8 character set. Sorry, I don't understand what it means. You understand what it means? No. You understand what it means? No, never mind. Okay. Now, you already took note of your, you already took care of UTF-8 at the PHP level side. You've taken care at the MB, you have ensured that in your database it's using UTF-8. Now you need to make sure that the display is UTF-8 enabled. Okay. So let's see some examples. I have one here. So like I said earlier, you have to ensure that you have called this function, internal encoding UTF-8, and another one, MB HTTP output UTF-8, to ensure that the output is in UTF-8 format. Assuming I have a string here like with this one, okay, and I try to manipulate it, say I just grab the first 15 characters. So if I display it, I should be able to show the correct string. And if I do this, okay, so let's compare L I don't know how to read it. So it's the same. Now let's try to remove this header part here. Okay, and let's run again. It's not showing properly. Okay, so that's one way of ensuring that at the HTML side, you also specify that, hey, I wanted to show this one in this format. So this example is actually accessing the database, but I don't have my database set up in my local, so I just call die, so it will not perform the next actions. Okay, questions so far? So near? Thank you very much for your time today. That's all. Yep. It's not